Hi there, I'm Richard Brent. I'm the editor-in-chief of Briefing Magazine, which stands for Smarter Legal Business Management. And welcome to our latest Briefing Tiger team, which, as I'm sure you know by now, is a model inspired by NASA that brings together people who don't usually work together with different skills, different backgrounds to tackle common problems across the business. And of course, our version is bringing together different business leaders from often different roles and different functions, and of course, different firms to tackle solutions which have been put to us by you, our readers, in some research. And we've done that on different topics. And today's is the turn of the risk management space, risk management function. And I think those are two words that probably are top of mind for quite a lot of people at the moment. So thanks very much to all of our Tigers who have joined us this morning, and they are in no particular order. Christian Toon, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at Pinsent Masons. Claire Larby, who's General Counsel and running the risk team at Trowers and Hamlins. We've got Daniel Pembroke, who's Head of Pricing at Norton Rose Fulbright. We have James Holman, who's the Head of Compliance, which includes being the COLP and the Money Laundering Officer and the Data Protection Supervisor at Waitmans. And Mark Parr, who's Global Director of IT at HFW. And I'm also joined by Christopher Young, who's the leader of the risk practice at Pinnacle, and Pinnacle is our partner on Tiger Team generally, and has helped us in developing the concept and the specific subjects that are up for discussion. So, when we put out our survey, asking firms what their sort of top risk challenges were in the current climate, when it comes to the risk role specific challenges, top of all was data protection risk management, which we will get into in a while. But after that top one, then the next two were tied, and they were quite broad challenges really. Even ahead of remote team management through this COVID crisis, we had broading and reporting your risk exposure, and also horizon scanning for new risks. So those seem to me quite broad topics rather than about individual risks that might be on your risk register, your risk radar. So I wanted to start by asking our Tigers whether this period, this particular crisis that they've had to risk manage, has changed sort of how risk management works fairly generally when it comes to things like considering what risks you need to prioritise, when it comes to considering how you report on risk and measure it, of course. So could I start with you, Christian? What's your sort of take on that one?
Sure. Thank you, Richard. So I think in essence, over the last 6 months, risk management has really been kind of put to the front of everyone's mind, because the business has needed to adapt and change to kind of work in this kind of current pandemic. And a lot of those decisions have needed to be risk-based. So we've certainly seen that the risk evaluation, that assessment process speed up massively, because actually we can't have the time to fully explore some of these options. Actually, we need to make a decision in the next 60 minutes that's going to affect 4,000 people. So the agility around that process has really been kind of tested and challenged. And then the process itself, because traditionally the risk assessment is completed, we kind of go through it with the stakeholders, we file it in our kind of risk management system, and then depending on the level of that risk, periodic reviews happen. But what we were finding, because we were having to make decisions very quickly and swiftly to enable our business to continue doing what it does, those review periods and cycles also needed to change, because we weren't just going to take a 60-minute call on something and then leave it for 12 months. So that whole process of evaluation of our business risks has really been kind of concatenated down to quite an agile, lean process now. And we're kind of going through the motions now as to whether or not that is our new normal and how we go forward.
How challenging was it to do that, to move to that new, that new?
Massively, because what we've asked our people to do is effectively don't take the kind of the 30 days, the 60 days time that you've taken previously to really fully understand all eventualities, all the mechanics of the control, the risk, the likelihood, and actually you've got a window here of which you need to make a judgment. And it's that pressure on making that judgment that I guess needs to be in the best interest of the firm. And hopefully, or thankfully, we've been okay on this, but actually we're giving you less time to evaluate the entirety of what you're dealing with. And we need to make that snap decision, because if we don't, our teams, our fee earners, practice groups, they're not going to be able to do what they need to do.
Okay. Yeah. Claire, how about you? Have you had to do something similar to that, or something different that is in any case a significant transformation of how risk was managed?
I mean, I think I echo Christian's comments, and he made some really good comments there. I mean, for us at Trowers, it was all about having that agile meeting environment, but making sure you had the right stakeholders around the table. So instead of having your regular board and executive meetings set at, the monthly times, etc., what you would have is a weekly meeting or bi-weekly, depending on the circumstances, of the right high-level stakeholders who had the ability to, you were reporting up to them, collating the necessary data and making sure that the decisions could be made swiftly and promptly, obviously, and making sure the right people are informed. And then what was really, really important was having a communication structure of then disseminating the information back down through the firm, so everyone had access to the information and knew the direction of travel and the strategy to be adopted. I mean, you spoke about the wider kind of risk areas, and naturally they were expanded upon and advanced as the risk profile was changing. So we were dealing with areas such as, well, how do we approach COVID? What do we need to do? Where are our employees going to be working? What support do they need? What equipment do they need? How can we best support our clients? What communications are we giving internally? What communications are we giving externally? And then getting into a bit more detail, such as looking from a regulatory perspective on supervision, for example, or the use of electronic signatures, powers of attorney. All of a sudden there was a boom in social correspondence via Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and actually how are we going to apply that as a firm? What guidance could we give about sharing confidential client information on these platforms? Were we going to allow those platforms to take place? So the agility of those meetings, the right stakeholders, the right communication platforms internally and externally, so our clients knew how we were approaching the situation, and then making sure that we dealt with all of the individual areas. So the risk landscape changed very quickly, but it was important that we were agile and adapted and say kept communicating.
Yeah, okay. James, what about you? Did you have to, we talked about sort of potentially needing to reprioritize risks, reconsider them. Did you have to do that across your remit, and what were the implications of that for how you sort of resource it as well?
Yeah, reprioritization was going to be my word. I think there's nothing like a real-time business continuity test, is there, to focus your mind on your priority list, and whether that's projects, whether that's people, kit, equipment, products, what's been said resonates. So the introduction of a product like, for example, Zoom, which we're using now, would, I am sure, have taken 3 months in prior to March world. But actually, because of necessity, having the right group of people on the meeting, and actually the frequency of that group of people meeting. So in the early parts of the pandemic, we were meeting daily. Effectively, our incident response team, if you like, to the crisis was meeting daily, looking at all of these very practical things as they came up day to day. As we've just heard, on the back of that, communication really critical, and actually quite a difficult thing to balance, because too much information just confuses everybody, or you lose their attention. Emails, people have an attention span for them, so you've got to get the points across those that are absolutely critical to them carrying on their daily function, get those front and center in some sort of bullet point, digestible way, and very practical stuff. So it was like conducting, as part of your business continuity program, where we're used to having annual or perhaps biannual tests of the plan, where you lock the board away and you go through a scenario. It was living that, and actually, really quite empowering in a way. Actually, some good stuff, and I think perhaps the language the management speak for years has been agile. But let's be agile. Let's be nimble. Let's. But in fact, you weren't living that at all, and it took something like this to hit you in the face to make you realise what nimble really means. I think that's a really valuable thing for us to take forward.
Okay. Mark, technology was very much on the front line, I suppose, of the response to this particular situation, this particular risk management situation. What sort of implications for that for how you had to work with, I suppose, the wider risk function in the firm?
I think it was interesting to see how many non-risk practitioners suddenly became expert in my field. So that was really rather interesting at the start, particularly when we talk about Zoom there. James mentioned it. We had a lot of noise, and you will all recall this, around the security issues with Zoom. Other platforms are available with their own security issues, of course. I think for us, it was interesting. HFW were already on a risk journey anyway. When I started in September, we had started to review our risk management and risk governance structure. So it was almost as though we had prepped ourselves for an event. Goodness, we never thought it was going to be like this, but we'd already started to do that and started to think about how we measured risk and then how we were controlling it. And I think the thing that we managed to do before the new year was think about business risk owners and the business's role to play in this. When I look at where we are now with technology in support of that, actually what I've had to do is move some of my projects and reprioritize to ensure that I can think about the new way in which we're operating. And actually, and we sort of had a bit of a discussion as a group before we started this recording, was thinking about the new way in which we're going to be having our people work. I've got to ensure that the technology enables that in a safe and secure way. So that's very much around thinking it's not just about a new tool being overlaid on what we had before, and it's not about just giving them the equipment to go and work from home. It's about giving them the right equipment to be able to carry out the role that they do. And one of the things I've been really keen to ensure we think about is it's not a one-size-fits-all law firm. And I know everybody will be thinking the same, but I've got to consider people against their personas and ensure that I give them the right tools to work effectively and securely, regardless of whether they're in the office, at home, Starbucks, whatever. And that's been quite a challenging exercise. So then how do you capture the risk around that? The fact that you are going to see people operating in different ways with not different equipment, but different tool sets, and how we manage that. And I think the biggest challenge has been measuring that risk, because it's all got to be underpinned with your firm's risk appetite. And that's been a really interesting challenge for HFW, is understanding what our tolerance is and how far your tolerance will change depending on what it is you're looking at as a risk.
Yes. Daniel, has the risk appetite of the pricing role in particular, has that changed at all?
I'd like to think not, but what we did when this all kicked off was we had a really good think about what was the impact going to be on pricing, as our clients across the globe are facing different challenges themselves. Some clients have proved very successful. We know some of the technology companies that have actually really flourished during this period. We know that some retailers have gone massively downhill, but some online retailers have done very well. And it was actually the last thing we did while we were in the office, in a brand new refurb floor with a great big digital whiteboard, and the team sat down and had a look at what we think the issues were going to be, and looking at price, looking at delivery, looking at whatever it might be. And it boiled down to us actually concluding that cash flow was going to be the really important thing. And there are some things that we can do from a pricing perspective, and some things we can do from a delivery perspective to help ease that. But we were going to have some clients turning around and saying to us, we can't afford that, but we still need your help. And so we came up with a toolkit to help partners respond. So when a client asks for an hourly rate discount, we'll probably come back and say, that's not really what we can do for you right now, or certainly not in the long term, but we can do this. So get in place some choices that we're going to help keep the relationship going, help us get paid to a degree, but also help support the clients too. Yeah, the processes themselves, in the research, I think one of the areas of risk that was highlighted was matter pricing. It took me a while to figure out what that actually meant. Were people worried about processes? I don't think they've been affected at all. We've heard about the outstanding work that IT teams and risk teams have done in terms of enabling us to work remotely. And I think because that's been pretty robust, we've been pretty consistent in the way in which we've been able to deal with those client opportunities.
Okay. Yes, I was going to mention that point actually. Matter pricing is in second place after remote working generally, unsurprisingly, when we asked roles right across the business. So that is quite interesting actually, that matter pricing would be so high. And going back to Mark's point about having the right sort of tool sets for the role working remotely, it brings me on to one of the points that was brought out by people was having the right data, having the right analytics, and I wondered if analytics, having the right information in order to make the new perhaps risk-based decisions that you are having to make, or to help you do this reprioritization, is that something that's sort of front of mind, or something that you feel like you need to invest more in? Christian, maybe from the cybersecurity perspective?
Sure, and I think one of the challenges everyone faces is just the volume of that data that exists now. The telemetry that can be seen across an organisation is phenomenal. I guess it's trying to kind of sort the wheat from the chaff and actually working out what's meaningful for you. Because as the old saying goes, what always can be measured probably doesn't always matter, but what really matters probably can't be measured. And it's about kind of bringing together the risk appetite that Mark alluded to, and sort of understanding where the concern is, what you're interested in, or what you're trying to achieve. Because, I mean, I look across our organisation, and I mean, if we're not careful, we can very easily drown in the volume of data we're getting, or actually spend more time and effort obtaining data points that actually, in the grand scheme of things, isn't going to give us that biggest return. So I think finding what those priority areas are is absolutely fundamental. So for us, we've come back to kind of reevaluating, well, what's important, where the risks are, how can we support that, and actually then looking at the culture of the organisation, which is probably one of the hardest things to measure in itself, when we talk about how our teams are working with their equipment, their technology, and that's as important, I think, as much as the technology challenge, because we want to make sure, I think to points already made, that actually our people are now looking to work differently and are working differently, and they need that support from us so we can enable them to do so.
Christopher, you've probably got a view on this sort of across firms from the different firms that you've been working with through this period. Are you finding that the demands on the data that they need have changed?
Absolutely. I think we, and actually, I think or a number of people have sort of mentioned it. Christian mentioned the sort of changing culture. Firms have become more real time, so recording time more promptly it's been brought up in a couple of the previous Tiger teams, because going to, I think it was Daniel's point about cash flow, you know, you don't know what your exposure to clients is if the time comes in at the end of the month, and if it takes you 3 weeks to get your bills out because people are faffing around over time, that's not good for the business. And we've seen a lot of and done quite a bit of work with firms, helping them with the cash flow forecasting, trying to get, when fee earners speak to clients and they get a date out of them for when a debt's going to be settled, that feeds straight into the finance team so it doesn't get chased up. But we're seeing much more real-time demands, which is really good, because we've all been working in a rather slow, sort of gentle world where time recording gets done at some point. And that's been really interesting to watch. And I guess what will be interesting is whether that culture sticks.
James, what about you? Would analytics be sort of higher, whether you're investing in it now or not? Would it be higher on your shopping list as a result?
Yeah, I mean, it's been escalating anyway, I would say, over the last 3 years in particular. But you know, drowning in data is not a bad way to put it. You can measure all sorts of things, but you've got to, I think, spend some time working out what it is that you want to measure and why, and what you then do with it. So we are seeing more and more interaction between MI and audit. So our own internal audit, whether that's done for, you know, a certification process, or it's done because it's client or regulator driven, or all of those things, increasingly you can influence audit outcomes and MI collation by churning data of one sort or another. But there is a balance, because as often as not, the data which you would like to collect requires a human manual input at some stage. So you don't want to have, you know, increasing burdens on all of your handlers to put data into MI boxes just so that you can run reports for the sake of it. So I think there is a balance. What we've been trying to do increasingly is look at those areas, the really key areas where the big clients in particular measure us, and look at how we might trend and look for patterns and efficiencies and better ways of working using the data that the system generates and collates, and then to put that into audit outputs and increase the communication back down through the firm around generating best practice.
Okay. Mark, what about you, with your technology obviously hat on?
Data means different things to different people as well, doesn't it? So, you know, if you talk to my team and say data, they will say, well, we've got data centers and big swathes and terabytes of memory holding all sorts. And we're tackling it slightly differently, and I think this is the right way for us to look at it, is if we understand the business process and how we go from inception to delivery to billing to making money, if we can then map that and then overlay that across all our sectors and find the bits where we can remove the duplication or automate the system, that's where we see us becoming more profitable. So particularly around the high volume, low value work. So very much business process mapping being necessary to do that. But actually what we're finding from doing that exercise is we can look across the entirety of the business to understand where there should be connections that haven't been previously. But we are a step or two away from really thinking, where does data give us the insight, and how do we understand that? And when we do get to that point, that's going to be a real pivotal moment. If we can unlock the data to provide insight that is valuable to our client, then we've really sort of grasped an understanding of how that data could be useful. But I think if there's a because data is such a big word, it means so much. It can mean people will look at it in a different way. So to some people, if you talk about data, they'll just go, well, you mean the amount, and that's not what we mean. So I think trying to understand what data it is. So back to Christian's point, you know, that you can pull all sorts of metrics out, but if it's not useful, then what's the point? So for us right now, mapping the process is key. Understanding where we can remove the work that can be automated, or the work that is done very many times over. That will get us to a point where we are seeing efficiencies, and that's what I think we want to get from our, from what data will mean to us.
Okay. And Claire, what about from your perspective? What this link between data and decision making? Is it about Mark said it's about having more data, having the right data, and obviously being able to generate the insight from it at the right levels within the firm?
Yeah, so I completely agree with all the comments that have gone on before. I mean, data has always been important within firms, and as I said before, having the right data going to the right people is absolutely valuable. A board, the executive, they need to make strategic decisions, and that's often based on the MI reporting and the data that they are presented with. So it's really important that there is the right systems to enable you to access that data accurately and effectively. And too often in law firms, you see they have many different systems containing different data, which it's really quite hard to mine and extract. And actually having effective systems and software that allow easy access to that data is absolutely valuable, and not just from a strategic perspective, but partners also want to know, their clients that they're billing, the WIP that they've got outstanding, how many bills they have out there, how can we make their life more effective? But it is also getting the right data. We found it invaluable during the whole process, but especially around COVID, looking at what was the intake for our clients, for our matters? Was that dropping off? Was it staying steady? And partners also wanted to have that information. How are we doing as a business? Are we still getting the same clients in? It's that transparency which is really helpful. What are our utilization rates looking like? What are the areas that are growing within the business? Where are the areas we need to concentrate on? So it's really important across all perspectives, having that information. And I think what James in particular spoke about before, and others have spoken about, is clients also want MI reporting on their matters. And we're seeing that more and more. And to have an effective way to report to clients, so you give them the information that they need within the timescales that they require, is something that everyone needs to be focusing on as well. So law firms have an abundance of data, and it is trying to ensure, as I said, we have the right software and systems so we can mine that data effectively and present the information to the right stakeholders at the right time to aid strategy and communication.
We obviously we can't not move on to talk about any risk sort of thoughts on the potential longer term shift to more remote dispersed working. I suppose perhaps if people are working from home, anecdotally anyway, we hear that people are even busier at home than they were in the office, in spite of having the apparent work-life balance advantages of having it. And so perhaps information overload might be even more of a risk for people sort of working away at home. And also this sort of point about productivity that is often brought up, that people that the common message that we're hearing is that it's you can be more productive as a lawyer or as someone else working in a law firm at home. That case stacks up. But I wonder, is there any risk in there? Will that productivity continue no matter how long people feel that they need to work from home? Does anyone have a view on that? Or are you measuring?
I wonder if we've mistaken productivity with working longer.
Right.
Because I don't commute now, so I don't have to leave my home at 8. I log on at 8 o'clock. And because I don't have to commute home and get home at 7, I log off at 7. So I've done more than my hours. I tell everybody I'm being productive, but all I'm actually doing is just spending longer at my device. So I do wonder if we've mistakenly called it that. And actually, I was having a discussion with one of my my heads of this morning, who sent an email last night at 11:30, that's not being more productive, and that's certainly not a work-life balance. That is working like a maniac. So I think there's a bit of, I'm so slightly curious whether other people feel the same. Are we being more productive, or are we just working longer?
To do with our availability. People assume that, well, you are there. You know, you're in your own home office, or in your bedroom, or at your dining room table, or whatever it is. And certainly at the start, because people were available and because there was a huge amount of change that needed to happen, and everyone's been very agile, and it of course helped us to deliver a load of good stuff, which I think is the productivity piece. It meant that I was certainly found that I would be interrupted more often than not. I'm very happy to talk to whoever wants to talk to me, but then that can have an impact on doing the actual tasks that you need to do. So there's a combination, but what we have done more successfully more recently is actually do things like put focusing time into our diaries, do not disturbs, just managing our own time a bit better. And people are aware of it. We're having lots of conversations about it. And I think people are slowly becoming a bit happier and really working on that work-life balance. I don't know about anyone else, but I go for a walk every morning to replace my traditional commute on the train, and I'll spend an hour or so. And I think that's helped me get in the right frame of mind for work, but also just to help me limit those hours, that logging on at 8 type thing.
Yeah, I think Mark makes a great point on sort of that confusion between time in front of the screen and productivity. I think we're sort of building on that. We see more of a kind of productivity curve, and it's people adjusting to that balance of trying to live at work at the moment, because that's kind of how it feels. And you know what? We are seeing 12-hour days, but we're then seeing 2, and they're sort of balancing that out. Overall, is it making them more or less productive? It's a very difficult one to measure given the kind of variety of roles. But I think it actually comes down to the kind of working time, and we're certainly seeing more of that, because finding that time to switch off, or having the skills to switch off, I think is a big one as well, as often overlooked, because for individuals that have traditionally been office-based, and not just for the last few months, but for their whole career spanning kind of 20 or 30 years, it's not a mindset they're comfortable with or familiar with. So actually the 5-minute break to go downstairs and sit in the lounge, or to move rooms, or to go put the washing on, actually feels like you're cheating on your employer. And that's a really hard emotion to get over. But actually offsetting that with the time that you are spending on work-related stuff, I think people are working longer, but actually sort of just trying to find what feels right, because they need to be more outcome-based now, and that's their management style that needs to kind of be put onto teams. But actually, I think a lot of people are still caught up on that stigma of out of sight, out of mind. You're at home, so you're clearly not doing any work. You're painting the conservatory or kind of cleaning the house. And it's that kind of leap of faith I think a lot of people still need to take.
Christian, do you think presenteeism will return?
I think there will be an element of it, but I think in the traditional sense, it's dead. The chief chap at PwC went on record kind of a month or so ago, basically saying presenteeism is dead as we know it, and I think that's right. And I think that's just had such an impact on everything from being present or seen to be present, so we can see what you're doing. But actually, it's changed the way we work, from networking to collaborative uses of technology. And I think we'll start to see more, actually, the presenteeism component is there for our mental well-being, for our social interactions, for elements of networking that are probably then going to be seen as novel now, whereas before it used to be joining a webinar or a kind of virtual dinner or invite. So I think there'll still be a place for it, but it certainly won't be to the level it was.
I think there's a big bit, particularly for the younger folk in our organisation, about we were part of their social life, and your firms, our clients, were part of our social life. You know, we would go out for a drink with the guys at Trowers and that sort of thing, and now they're in a relatively small flat with the same 4 walls and the same 1 or 2 flatmates. and they're quite keen to be present somewhere else.
You know, a massive saving on your social budget then.
Yeah, we have got quite a big saving on our social budget. I'm not sure that's a good thing for our mental well-being, but and I certainly am really keen to get back into town. I did come back into town and it was dead. You sort of wondered, why am I going to bother? Because there's nobody here.
Yeah, but we've been back a few times as well, and I think actually at the moment it's almost that kind of novel new factor, and spend more of my time now in the office talking to people that are there in the office about kind of their experiences and everything else. And actually you can really notice that you've missed that level of engagement. My significant other, family, friends, etc., they just don't have the same passion or interest in cybersecurity. So I kind of, I know, right? I don't know what's wrong with them. But having that kind of level of engagement where you can talk about kind of communal projects or shared interests relating to work, I think has really been missed. And I think kind of edging back into an environment that allows you to do that in a balance that is supportive of your home life with your work commitments, I think is absolutely crucial.
I think the other bit, just going back to that presenteeism, the challenge in global firms is, the organization never sleeps. And working from home, that becomes really hard to switch off because the guys in the States have woken up and then Asia wakes up and you end up with that wall of stuff coming in.
And we have seen a slightly different view on returning to the office around the world. So we certainly saw in Asia a slightly different view of office reopening. And what we thought would be a steady return was actually en masse, which was really, really interesting. And some of that was born out of conditions being better in the office than they would be at home. So that's a really interesting. It was something we weren't expecting, I think, on such a scale.
Because I think there are new risks for us, aren't there, or greater focus on risks that we were aware of, but we're lower down the consciousness. And we've touched on mental well-being, health and safety, and risk assessments, and all of that piece about whether it's somebody working at home for the first time or wanting to go back into the office now. There's a whole industry around it to ensure that they're safe, their colleagues safe, their travelling is safe, the client is safe. All of those things are very physical, really, and are taking up quite a lot of our time now. And the mental well-being area, which has been increasingly elevated up people's consciousness over the last sort of 5 years or so, anyway, is really affects people dramatically differently. So the Asian example a moment ago is at one extreme. You've got people absolutely desperate to get out of their domestic environment because it's very, very difficult to work for any kind of consistent period in that environment. And you've got other people who are thinking, well, I just can't face commuting ever again. Lots of people in between. But I think from the staff surveys we've been doing, the majority of our people are currently and for the foreseeable expressing a pretty considerable reluctance to go back on a train, for example. And it depends what your role is. It depends where your clients are, and how physical and personal your interrelationship with those clients has to be. And it's interesting, the difference between practice areas. If you're a court-based individual, or if you're a private client lawyer, or if you're a commercial corporate lawyer, very, very different reactions to the environments in which they now find themselves.
James, the client liaison point is really interesting because you may find that when people are going back into the office to interact with their clients, they end up just having a video conference. You can do that from anywhere.
Yep. Yes, I think that's right. I mean, I'm based in the north of England and have spent 30 years going up and down to London quite a lot for all sorts of reasons. And looking back, you now wonder, for the majority of those occasions, what was I doing? Why was I why was I spending 4 hours in each direction going to that meeting? How effective was it as a use of time? And you multiply that out across an organisation with 1,500 people travelling all over the place, all the time. To use technology is it does potentially free up an awful lot of time to people, but the danger is you just sit at your desk for an extra 4 hours a day, and so your mental health suffers in that regard. And I think from risk professionals, talking to your HR team, talking to your facilities people, talking to health and safety experts within your firm, you've got to be very mindful of all of those things that certain people don't just slip into. I'm now going to work 16 hours a day looking at my screen and never move, because that I don't think that can be a sustainable proposition.
What about compliance in terms of your compliance of the supervision of people? You mentioned sort of clients as well. So presumably it's not just about making sure that people are working for the right number of hours, but the impact that working remotely could have on performance or on client service. Is that a sort of consideration?
Yeah, it's a really big consideration. I think it's fair to say that a number of law firms are reporting a rise, for example, in professional negligence claims or complaints that are coming in, and that's the demographics as we're seeing it. It was really important to ensure that the supervision is effective, as provided for by our regulatory requirements. And there is a difference between supervising in person within the office and supervising remotely. And it is up to each individual who is responsible for supervising to make sure that what they are doing is effective. And that also helps towards, I think, good supervision will lead to obviously a lowering of a chance of professional negligence claims, etc., but also for mental health and well-being, because they are interacting with their teams, which is so very important. The other areas that you're seeing is making sure that people are working in a secure, confidential environment. And that's really important, because you do have people who are working from home where you have a flat share or a house share, and they're finding it difficult to have a conversation without mentioning the name of the client or their computer screen being overlooked. And it's important to have a conversation with that individual to say, how can you work safely and securely and make sure that we are maintaining client confidentiality? So there are a number of risk factors, as there always are with remote working, but it's making sure that you look at those, analyse them and work effectively. And just to come back to a couple of comments, I think on the flip side of working, one of the positivities I found, particularly with my team, is that we are spread out across the country in different offices. And my team are personally saying, actually, we really like the fact that everyone is working remotely, because we've never had so much communication, because we are all on the same platform speaking to each other regularly, whereas before you would have more of a kind of a London-centric maybe conversation. You'd get together every 2 weeks to have a bigger team meet. But now there's more and more access, and they feel very much more integrated across the offices, which has been really quite interesting. And that's been a positive result that's come out.
Jumping on the security point, Christian and Mark, can people be as cybersecure as Claire sort of alluded to there, working from a flat share as you can from an expensive law firm office?
I think measuring that security or answering that question in that way is probably the wrong way to go about it. Mm-hmm. It's about, I guess, understanding what the security risks are operating in this way, and then kind of managing those risks. Yes, organizations can manage those risks in a way that they feel comfortable. The biggest challenge has been, I think, and certainly was what we've seen, is that swift change we've had to make from office-based employees and the kind of threat models around there and the subsequent controls that we operated to, well, actually all of a sudden we've got people now in 3,500 offices across the globe individuals working in spaces described by Claire and others that are either conducive for work or not, but actually how can we give them the right technology, one of the themes that through this session, that helps them be better at doing what they're doing. And it's not just then giving them that technology, ensuring it is kind of safe and secure to use, but also that they understand how to use it. And it's the behavioral piece that lets a lot of organizations down when it comes to kind of breaches and attacks, because there's either been a lapse in employee kind of consciousness or behavior, or they just don't know what they should be doing. And we've seen a real change in focus as to what we talk about now people are at home. We talked about the kind of the threats and the attacks that we're seeing in the industry across the globe, and what that means to them. Now they're working out of their either their penthouse or their shared house, and what that means to them on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, it's certainly capable and certainly possible that people can do that. It's understanding what's important. A big one for us was printing at home. And I know there'll be a sharp intake of breath that, what, the legal sector still do this? Unfortunately, yes. But when we were in the office, we had some great controls that stopped people doing that, plugging in third-party devices, controlling the printing through specific routes. Suddenly, we closed off those routes overnight and we moved everyone home. And there was still that need and demand. Some of that was driven from personal need and demand. You know what, I just like reviewing a physical document. Others were driven by court process, client expectation or demands, etc., that needed a physical component to it. So suddenly we have to reevaluate that security risk of saying, well, no, you can't print at home, to, well, actually, hang on, you do need to. And how do we provision that?
And just, sorry, just picking up on Christian's points as well, I should have mentioned, obviously, there is also that reminder, and we know people know it, but you need to work within the law firm secure environment. So don't be tempted to send emails and documents to your personal email account, your laptop. Make sure you're working within the environment that the law firm has given to you. Is something that is of fundamental importance. So it's just, again, that analysing the risk and the communication as to how you can work effectively, because we can. It's just making sure that all the individuals are aware of what's required, and even down to, don't have remote recording devices when you're having a client call in your room. Don't have Alexa on, for example, as it's got a known recording capability. It's just people don't know what they don't know, and making sure that you come out with a manual to say, this is how we can all work together effectively.
I think it's been about very much making sure you can help them do the right thing. That's the focus, and changing it from thinking about that 1% or the 0.1% that might be the malicious actor, and thinking that 99.9% of people want to do the right thing, therefore you've got to help them do the right thing. I think that's the other challenge from around technology, is how far is my reach as the sort of CIO for HFW? How far does my reach go? Am I responsible for the broadband provision that goes to that building? Am I responsible, to make sure that their children's Netflix isn't streaming at 4K because it's going to impact on the business's VPN? That's been a really interesting challenge, and something that I giggle when I see somebody complaining that 8 p.m. at night their connectivity becomes a little intermittent. You go, well, that's because everybody else in your home is suddenly online. So that's how far is our reach? So for Christian's point around printing, how much of that thought do we have to give around, right, if they are printing, are we then responsible for collecting the stuff that they print to bring back into the office to dispose of? Or do we ask them to do it? And if they do it, do we have to give them the shredder that does it, or the printer that they want in the first place, or the printer cartridges? So where's our, because I certainly haven't budgeted for all of my people to have printers at home and shredders at home and mechanisms to dispose of all that collateral. So it's, the challenge, and I think this will stay for a while, is how far does our reach extend?
James, do you have a view on that one? Because one of your roles is data protection officer, isn't it?
Yes, I'm interested in the printing discussion, because we've actually used the the pandemic as an impetus to drive paperless rather more quickly through than it might otherwise have come. Because you can never get anything past lawyers in one go, we started with paper light, which was inevitably a bit of a fudge, and paperless I think will remain something of a pipe dream until the courts are set up differently and the world moves on in that regard. But we've deliberately decided not to have printing capability at home, and we have the ISO 27001 information security standard, and we have as part of that quite strict policies about taking documents out of the office if you can and how you do it, and there's a lockdown process and so on. So our approach has been to try and drive through the paperless aspirations as much as we can. There are lots of human issues with that. People at all sorts of stages of the journey, from how do I switch my computer on to I can't live without it. It is very, very difficult, and I number myself amongst them. If you've been working for 30 years, you will have worked before there were computers, and you will have established a way of working. Certain work types also, I think, are much more difficult to work paperless than others. If it's a very document-heavy piece of litigation, there is, technology can help you, but actually, lots of people are not particularly comfortable unless they've got the paper all over the desk. I think you have to balance your aspiration with a bit of reality and set some policies that give a degree of flexibility in those cases that demand it. But then, as has been said, you've got to follow through and have audits and proper process to ensure that if people are printing at home, for example, that there is a process around keeping that documentation safely, around destruction of it, and so on. So it's I think there are more opportunities than there are threats, but perhaps slightly different threats. But so I think I would categorise it as something I've overall seen it as a positive, and I think Waitmans will come out of it, with more in the credit side than the debit side, in relation to cyber. Final thing on that topic, I suppose, is because it is now unavoidable, everyone's having the conversation. So, you can roll out online training till you're blue in the face, but you can't really sit there and make somebody read it carefully and seriously, as opposed to just skip through all of the pages if they're not very interested. But if you're actually having to work at home with remote technology and deal with policies, and people are communicating with you about it, and they are auditing things, and you are being required to evidence what you've done, the conversation is now happening, which is perhaps culturally the biggest step forward of all.
James, have you had to give people sort of bigger screens and all of that to get that paperless working?
Yeah, we've over the last couple of years, we've been rolling out some dual screens to everybody in the offices. So we've effectively replicated that at home. We were on the journey of doing that anyway, because the offices were becoming agile. So there was an increasing amount of home working anyway over the last 2-3 years. So we've just accelerated that process really, but anyone who wants it has the ability to completely replicate their office desk at home.
Including the desk and the chair and...
There are, I don't think it's the same physical piece of kit, but there are allowances, yes, for people to acquire a desk and a chair, and because obviously, we had to recognise that not everybody is fortunate enough to have had a study set up at home in which they could work. In fact, the majority of people probably didn't have those things, and it's one thing to work from your dining table for an hour here or there, but it's a completely different thing to do it permanently. Which is what we were asking people to do.
Certainly is. Good. Well, we've got a wide range of risks there, as we might have expected. It could be anywhere, I suppose, on that risk register. just come back to the very beginning where I mentioned that, when we started this, we went out to our readers and asked them to sort of, rank them. I'd be really interested in, from each of you, just very, very briefly, which of these areas, or indeed if there's another area that we haven't talked about, would be, it has been top of your mind in this 6-month period, if you can do so, and if there's a particular thing that you have done about it. Interesting to know. Who can I put on the spot first? Maybe Daniel?
Thanks for that. I was actually just thinking about maybe now's a good time to rerun that survey, because the risks are probably a bit different now. And kind of dodging your question, one of the risks that I think are present is we've been through a massive period of really quick change, with very quick risk assessments and decisions being made. And it looks like a lot of them have been successful. But normally after a period of change that's that intense, you would have a period of reflection. And what I'm wondering is whether the expectation on all of these fantastic functions that have been delivering that change will be harsher, whether they will be demanding the same level of change and rate of change, or whether we will be able to sit back and go, hang on, let's just work out whether that was right or wrong.
Interesting, thank you. Claire?
Sorry, just going for the unmute there. Obviously, there has been a myriad of different risks and changes, but I think there's, we can kind of look at, one is client facing. So our clients have had their own challenges, and they've had to change the way they've been working. So one of it has been trying to really understand what the risks they are facing and the problems they are facing. And two examples are really exploring how the use of electronic signatures, for example, or powers of attorney would benefit them, and changing and implementing structures to enable us to work seamlessly and effectively together as we have been, whilst providing the support they need, even down to helping them with their internal printing and things like that. So, making sure that we can provide that service to the clients, and making sure that we can help and assist them as well. From an internal risk perspective, obviously that has gone from anything to providing that safe, secure working environment for our employees, making sure that they are fully supported and communicated with, everything from health and safety, but also returning to the office and giving them the right structure and advice as to how they can do that, to how again they can work effectively from home. So to rank them, I think actually, to be honest, there is so much within there that has, arguably equal importance to even, as we went back at the beginning of our discussion, making sure our stakeholders had that right data and making sure that we could report to them effectively so they could make the right strategic decisions. They've all got different weightings. They're all arguably equally important in their own right. So I'm sorry, it sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but there's just so much to this at the minute.
I was going to say, it could be a lawyer's answer.
Absolutely, I'll leave it with that.
Mark, what about you?
Go back to the start of the conversation, we talked about the need to be agile. I think we've all demonstrated our firm's agility. And aligned to Daniel's point around then the pace at which we are delivering whatever it is we're delivering, I think the risk for me of the expectation we will continue to run at that cadence, and at what point do we fall over because we are exhausted. So I think understanding that we went through something quite exceptional at the start of this year that has led to significant change, that doesn't mean now the new normal is we run everything as if we're in crisis mode. And I think that's my number one risk.
I've heard the word exhaustion a few times recently.
That period of consolidation, whether it's likely or not, I don't know. James, any final thought from you?
Final thought for me is having, it's a bit like the duck's legs going 10 to the dozen underwater, and something moving serenely on the top. We've had a few months of trying to get some very basic understanding of how our businesses can function, actually the single most important thing alongside our staff and their well-being is the client. I suppose for me, as the culp and sort of central point for, things have gone wrong, they come to me. What strikes me is that I think we have been quite successful in converting completely the business model, because I haven't seen lots and lots of clients coming along saying we've had a complete failure of service delivery here. So I think the things that we've had to in a hurry have worked pretty well, and we do actually now need to make sure that it mirrors what the client wants and the client needs, because as someone else said a moment ago, they're living through the same problem with their people and their business model, I think it would be quite easy to take the eye off that ball if you're not careful. So we only exist to service the client, don't we? We have to understand what's going on in their world, and I think for me the biggest risk now is what's going on in the client's world. Let's have the right conversations at the right level to make sure that the decisions that Waitman's now makes are going to fit with what the client needs, so we're fixing the right problem.
And Christian, data, clients, or something else top of your mind as a leader?
All of them, to be fair. I mean, I'd certainly agree with the comments there about kind of focusing on those positive client outcomes. I think it's going to be key. They're paying the salaries and investment for us as a firm, certainly. When we look internally, the risks associated with this kind of modern workplace that we're creating, around its sustainability, its resilience, both in its technology, but also in its people and our people that are kind of in there, making sure that they're fit and able, that fatigue, as has been mentioned, and exhaustion kind of is kind of not where it needs to be. And then from a security point of view, I think the risks really sit around our technology and our infrastructure, because it has changed and will continue to change as we support those client outcomes and that modern workplace. The endpoint has moved to home, to residential settings in a variety of what they look like. But the risks are still very much there for the legal profession around ransomware, phishing, email compromise, data loss prevention. All of those still exist, but it's kind of mapping those against how we're operating today, and that will be a true measure of our success.
And finally, Christopher, as a different but comparable perhaps business, what's been top of your risk radar?
I guess picking up sort of all of that resonates. I guess we are working really hard to understand what's going on in the world of the law firms, and how we could help, either not make things worse or truly help. And I think the bit that we're internally wrestling with is how do we we're seeing incredible demand, and we need to bring in more people, and particularly younger people, and how do we do that supervision? And I think we're rapidly concluding that we need to do that in an office, and we need to find a way of getting small groups of people to mentor 20-something-year-olds, and that's going to be a bit of a challenge for us.
And that brings us right up to date. Well, thank you very much to all of the Tigers that joined me today. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you to our partner Pinnacle as well. And Tiger Team will be back soon, and I hope you will join us again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.